What's up, everyone, and welcome into the Dear Miss Fantasy Show for week 15. I'm Tara Roberts. It is the official mailbag show for Player Profiler, and we're going to do things a little bit differently this week. Usually, we do a hot topic from the previous week, although it was tough. I theoretically wanted to talk about the Ravens and the Rams because that was my clear favorite game of the week, but because it is the fantasy playoffs, I thought we would do things a little bit differently. We're going to focus on strategy and things to help you get ahead in the playoffs, thrive, and get a championship. And our questions are focused around that as well. We got some good questions in this week. So this is going to be a fun show. This is good. I mean, and here's the thing as well. Even if you're not in the fantasy playoffs, at the very least, I know you're fighting to make sure that you are not in last place. So you're still in it, you're still trying, and you're still getting ready for next year as well. This is good. These are good strategies that are going to help us out in the long term. We also do have some questions, or we do have at least one question for next year as we start to kind of move forward and prep for the off season. And I will continue the show through the off season. We'll be talking about all kinds of fun stuff, free agency, draft, obviously, incoming rookies, changes in teams, dynasty. Oh yeah, it's gonna be. I've got some good stuff in store for you. So don't think because we're winding down the season that things are gonna slow down and content's gonna get less interesting. It's gonna get more interesting. It's gonna get more fun. I promise. Because I love the off season. My favorite time of the football. I mean, I love in season. Obviously, it's super fun, but prepping for free agency and planning for the potential chaos that there is one of my favorite things to do. And this is a good, like last year's free agency was like a little lackluster. This year's free agency is going to be very, very interesting because remember, we've got all these running backs. They're coming off of these 1-year deals. Oh man, it's going to be so much fun to talk about. Let me go ahead though and dive right in to our playoff prep, the playoff prep show for Dear Miss Fantasy. Starting off with strategy, real quick. The things that we're kind of focusing on in this show is getting a week ahead of things, making sure that we are hoarding our handcuffs, philosophically figuring out what we're doing in the fantasy playoffs, starting studs, making sure that we're not panicking and benching guys because of matchups. We've also got a ton of injuries that, have forced us into more heavy streaming options. So there's a lot to cover. And a good example in terms of like starter sides and injuries and issues. I got a question yesterday. Should I bench TJ Hawkinson? And I went through the list of tight ends that I could trust more than TJ Hawkinson, and the list started and ended with Travis Kelce. I understand we're not looking forward to the quarterback situation ahead for Minnesota. They've tried admirably since Kirk Cousins went down, but it's possible that we're in for Nick Mullins and then maybe he fails and we get Jaron Hall and then maybe they give Josh Dobbs a try again. Like there's 1,000 different things that could happen. There's no set quarterback. I don't think this is a situation like a Joe Flacco situation where Joe comes in, earns a spot, and we've got no controversy, like we're good to go. I don't think it's that situation. So I understand that it's terrifying having a tight end with a complete unknown at quarterback, but we are in the fantasy playoffs. And regardless of that situation, we are starting our studs. We're not going to bench TJ Hawkinson and try and stream something that's incredibly unreliable or matchup dependent. We just don't want to be doing that at this point. And speaking of streaming, we'll go ahead and jump into the quarterback streamers here. Now, these are guys that are not. Now, this is we're a Wednesday show. Now, I have I don't know two leagues that run their waivers on Thursday. So for some of you, obviously, this can help in terms of waiver wire content and you figuring out who you're grabbing. But for the most part, people's waivers are running on Wednesday and. Wow, you've already gone through and waivers have run and you're looking back and you're seeing what's left. Now, granted, there's probably a lot of stuff left. You would be surprised the amount of solid players that are still decently low rostered and could be available in your leagues. So don't feel like this is don't feel like these are waiver recommendations. If these are guys that you have on your team, these are, kind of recommendations to help you out in terms of navigating who to start, who you can rely on. And then if they're on waivers, absolutely. I've got some recommendations in here for you. But we're going to start off with a nice core group here in terms of quarterback streamers. Matt Stafford, Joe Flacco, Jake Browning, and Gardner Minshew. And Matt Stafford at this point, let's be honest, he has earned the right to not be a streaming quarterback. Obviously, there were some inconsistencies throughout the season, and a lot of that had to deal with injured players and injuries to Stafford. But over the past 3 games, he has looked like a completely different player. The Rams have looked like a completely different team. And we've seen, then the thing about this is that this is not like, and we'll get to, Jake Browning in a second, but Jake Browning's, two-game hot streak right here. We know that did indeed happen during good matchups. Matt Stafford and why he is such a priority here and why he is actually a top 12 quarterback, potentially moving forward, definitely this week and moving forward rest of season, is because we have seen him perform at this excellent level in bad matchups. Cleveland and Baltimore. Over this time period, he has had 10 touchdowns, only 1 interception, around 23 fantasy points per game. He's thriving. He's doing so well. And I don't think it's a coincidence that all of this is centered around the return of Kyren Williams. You got to remember, Stafford got injured. There was a bye week. Kyren had been out, and they all come back at a nice, clean point here. And for the past 3 games, they just look like a really, really good team. Defense, obviously, still a little bit shaky, but competitive. At the same time, this offense is thriving, and it's starting to feel like we can trust Cooper Kupp. We were feeling Puka Nacua. He's doing strong. Kyren Williams, I mean, just fantastic in terms of the production and the way that you can rely on him as a workhorse back. Even Davis Allen stepping up. We'll talk about that one in a second in tight end streamers. Davis Allen, my Clemson boy. I made sure I wore a nice bright orange Clemson shirt for this. If you're watching a video, just for the sake of my Clemson alumni brethren. But I think that Matt Stafford is the top option here. And there's some other guys that are higher roster that you could turn to, like a Russell Wilson and whatnot. I don't want to dip into the Baker Mayfield area. I mean, it's not the worst thing that you can do, but I think there are just different directions that you can go. And Matt Stafford is one of those guys that we're trusting. Moving on to kind of lower roster guys, Jake Browning. There's so much skepticism around Jake Browning. I think it's for real. He's inexperienced. He's a backup quarterback, and he's been in good matchups. But the first game that he started against Pittsburgh, I was encouraged by it. It wasn't fantastic from a fantasy perspective, but he looked competent. And that's the thing here, that we've got him being accurate, looking competent, making strong decisions, and it just makes things so much easier when your entire team is just incredibly reliable. Jamar Chase obviously had, that's week 13 game was very, very strong, and we were feeling very encouraged. And then in week 14, Browning had an excellent game. Jamar Chase did not. A lot of that receiving production went to the running backs. But as a whole, when we look at this team, you got to realize what is really making Browning thrive. Aside from the fact that he does have talent, he's surrounded top to bottom by one of the best supporting casts in the entire league. You've got Jamar Chase. You got T. Higgins, who I know has been disappointing, but it's still T. Higgins. You've got Tyler Boyd as a wide receiver 3. You've got excellent options, and I say excellent for Joe Mixon. Sorry, I have this like one-sided like fade. I was gonna say one-sided beef. This kind of fade issue with Joe Mixon, but I've come around to it as the season has gone on. But Joe Mixon, very reliable running back, and as a whole, it's just so much easier as a backup quarterback to come in and thrive when you're placed into such an ideal situation. In this past game, Browning completed 18 of 24 attempts for 275 yards. That's impressive. That means that he doesn't have to have high volume to succeed. It's different than like Joe Flacco, where we're seeing him out there, pushing the ball aggressively, high volume. With Browning, we've got low volume here and we've got efficiency. I don't mind it at all. A lot of times people say, how efficient can you be for how long? I think he can be efficient as long as he is surrounded by these players. So I'm trusting it. I think it's for real. In this week's matchup is against Minnesota. That's the only issue here is that, again, he's had these layup matchups and now he goes against Minnesota and it's obviously a tougher situation. So when we're looking at streaming quarterbacks, he does fall behind, obviously falls behind Matt Stafford. And he does for me, like just barely falls behind Joe Flacco on this one because I'm trusting it and I'm rostering him and I'm streaming him if I have to. But if I have the ability to go to someone that a veteran that I've seen before, I prefer to do that because when we're looking at Joe Flacco again, he's popped up as a very strong streaming option again because of that volume that he's had. Over the past 2 games as the Browns starter, he's thrown a total of 89 passes for over 500 yards, over 550 yards, 5 touchdowns, a couple interceptions. Like, this is not an anomaly. This is the exact same thing that we saw over in New York last year. He has transitioned into this high volume quarterback, and it's very beneficial from a fantasy perspective. But again, this is another issue of when I talked about this multiple streaming options at quarterback this week and why we are sticking with our studs like Matt Stafford and we're not panicking. And, if you've got a starting quarterback in a bad matchup, you can't bail out of it right now because these streaming options have these bad matchups. Flacco's got Chicago this week. Chicago's defense has been on the rise. I think we talked about Chicago as a defensive trend last week. Again, they made the midseason trade for Montez Sweat, and since then, their pass rush is just better. As a whole, they're pulling things together better, and they're not a layup that they were earlier in the season. So when you're looking at Chicago, you're like, this is not a good defensive matchup. So we, do got to be cautious with Flacco. But again, because of the volume and because, again, he's also got a very strong supporting cast in Amari Cooper, Elijah Moore, the third and fourth receiver stepping up as well, and David Bell and Cedric Tillman, and running back situation strong. We do, worry about Jerome Ford, but hopefully everything's good to go. But you've got Kareem Hunt as well. You just think that they're going to continue to push this volume and make this playoff push. So Flacco is also an option. And then worst comes to worst, you can turn to Gardner Minshew. Minshew is my least favorite option because there's only a certain level of upside that he can have. He's not going to get, well, he has before when he got the random 2 rushing touchdown game. But for the most part, he's not going to get you into that 20 plus fantasy point range because he just doesn't have that next level gear and that ability to get there. But he's a nice safe option. He can get you in that 15 to 18 fantasy point range. He's not going to ruin your week. He's going to get you a little something because Michael Pittman is thriving. So at least you got that. So you can turn to him because outside of that, man, things are looking slim at quarterbacks. So recommendation here is to grab you and stash you one of these quarterbacks if you can. You need to grab one of these streaming options and hold on to them, because otherwise you're looking at saying, am I like, we got brand new quarterbacks in Easton Stick and Nick Mullins. Then you're turning to risky streamers like Desmond Ritter, like you saying, am I starting Will Levis? He's in a good matchup. It's just getting so rough out there. So you need to be making sure that if you're streaming quarterbacks, that you have one of these stable options that we talked about. Mailbag question here from Illini parent. Hey, Tara, lost Herbert for the season. Oh, I feel that pain. Have Goff on roster. Who is the best streaming option this week? I like Russell or Browning. What would you do if it was your team? And I get this because obviously, you've got Goff, but it's a tough choice because Denver is a very good matchup. Now, I will say I don't have a major issue going with Goff this week because it is in Detroit. It is in the Dome, and that is fantastic news for Jared Goff, even in a difficult matchup. That's kind of the key differentiating factor with him. So technically speaking, I would go with Goff, even though it's a difficult matchup, just because I am trusting him given the circumstances that it's at least at home and he can push high volume. That's what we tend to see from Jared Goff. But if you're a little bit hesitant about that, and I get that, between Russell Wilson and Jake Browning, it's Russ for sure. Again, we're talking about this matchup with Detroit and, Browning versus Minnesota. More difficult matchup is against Minnesota. Detroit's defense has been lit up all season. They started off okay. But the problem is that they're not holding it together very well, especially against the pass. They're still holding it together against the run, but against the pass, they're struggling. We saw it last week in Chicago. Even Justin Fields was able to get off, a couple big plays, and I feel bad about it, but we gotta attack it. We gotta attack the defense here, and this should be a more of a back and forth than you would think, because you think Denver's defense is going to shut things down a little bit, but I think when we look at the circumstances here, that this might be a little higher scoring than anticipated, and I think Russ can really exploit this matchup. So between Russell Wilson and Jake Browning, I definitely lean towards going with Russell Wilson. Before we get to our next mailbag question, we are going to hear a word from our sponsors.
Hey, so many ask me, what's wrong with sportsbooks? Why so many of them fail? The answer is simple. They don't innovate. They're just casino sportsbooks on a phone. That's all they've been. There are a few that are doing a good job. We partner with them. Most of them, not so much. Until Bet Openly came along. Bet Openly said, hey, we're going to innovate. We're going to do something groundbreaking. We're going to have peer-to-peer betting in all states, and you pay 1%. When you win, you pay just 1% on your winnings. You heard that right. It's 1%. With code Underworld, you qualify for just that 1% transaction fee on Bet Openly. It gives you ultimate flexibility to set your own lines and browse lines that others have set. Think about it. That's what betting should be, and now that is the reality. BetOpenly.com. The code is Underworld. Check it out.
All right, jumping back into another mailbag question here around quarterbacks from Jeffro _75. 0 to 10 on the reckless scale. I'm seriously contemplating starting Zach Wilson next week versus Washington, if I am blessed to make it that far, over Tua versus the Cowboys. Depending on how Tua and Tyreek look versus the Jets, I have Brees and Garrett too. Chips all in with the Jets. Congrats on having chips all in on the Jets and making the playoffs. I'm joking, kind of. No, like people don't understand how much sometimes when you invest in these teams where they should have been better. Like the situation in New York should have been better, and obviously things went sideways. But you make the best of it with Brees Hall and Garrett Wilson. So I feel you on that one. But when we're looking at this, and this is such a good point for the playoff preps, you're not just looking at this week. You're looking ahead to next week, championship week, and trying to get all your ducks in a row. And this is a really good point. And I don't think you're unhinged here in terms of your 0 to 10 for reckless. You're like, oh, it's like a 5. I am well documented as being an anti-Tua in the playoffs person, and I'm sticking with my guns. We can't trust him. We can't trust him. And it started last week, honestly, where he just doesn't have the mobility. Like, you don't need a ton of mobility, but you need a little something. You need a little something. And he just doesn't have it, unfortunately. And so you get into these bad situations where teams figure out how to attack you. And while he's able to supply his receivers, now technically that didn't happen last week because Tyreek had the ankle issue, but he's able to supply his receivers with these, high production games. We saw that last time with the Jets. We've already seen Tua versus the Jets one time. Tua was bad from a fantasy standpoint. He had a terrible fantasy game, like 10 fantasy points. Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill had excellent games. He can give the ball to them. He doesn't have the package. He doesn't have the fantasy package to put up a high amount of points unless it's an absolute wild shootout. That's the issue with Tua and why I am down on Tua in the playoffs, because these matchups are just bad for his fantasy value. So yeah, Zach Wilson versus Washington next week, or Tua versus the Cowboys. The only caveat here is the Cowboys defense has been a wee bit suspect. But yeah, depending on how Tua looks this week, I'm not opposed to it. I know that I say start your studs, but when it comes to Tua Tagovailoa, this is the one instance that I'm willing to vary against that. Now, that said, I felt like Zach Wilson was going to have a very strong game last week. And I called it, and it happened because he has that kind of attitude. It's not that he has that dog in him. He's got just enough dog in him to where if you disrespect him, he's cocky enough to come out and put out his best performance to show you that you were incorrect. And he did that. I don't know if it's going to last beyond this week. Potentially. Maybe he's really on a tear here and he's trying to showcase how they made obviously the clear wrong decision. We talked about that. And maybe he's able to pull it through. It'll be interesting to see. I think it's a possibility that you could start Zach Wilson, but we're going to play it by ear, but I don't think you're wrong here. I don't think you're wrong here to plan a pivot potentially to Zach Wilson. And the reason why as well is because week 16 is also a weird one where we don't have a ton of ideal matchup situations. There's not a ton of ideal matchup situations. Our streaming options are getting thinner. So yeah, you are looking ahead and making these plans, and matchup-based Zach Wilson is not the worst option. Moving on to running backs, we're going to talk handcuffs here for a little bit. And there's two that I want to talk about. Rico Dowdle and Chase Brown. These are two guys that you need to, if they're on waivers, you need to acquire them and put them on your fantasy roster. And if you have them, you need to be aware of the best way for you to use them. Right now, we are not trusting them as actual flex options. They do offer standalone value. They've shown that. Rico Dowdle has shown it. I don't want to say consistently because it's been off and on every single game for the past 5 weeks. He's had 13 fantasy points. I don't know the exact fantasy points, but it's been like, okay, he's got 13, 5, 9, 6, 10. It's bouncing back and forth between him being roughly around 10 fantasy points and then having one off game. So we're not truly trusting his standalone value here. But we're trusting that he is a top tier option to have in the fantasy playoffs, because if something were to happen to Tony Pollard, Rico Dowdle goes into an immediate 3 down back role that's very similar to what Pollard had last year when Ezekiel Elliott went down. Because the key that you have to remember is these guys don't, particularly with a guy like Dowdle, they're not going into a situation where it's like, okay, he's gonna go into Tony Pollard's production. No. He will go into an opportunity better than Tony Pollard because he doesn't have to deal with himself. He'll go into a 3-down back. He has the capabilities for that. It's beautiful that we've seen him consistently used in the red zone at the goal line. They're trusting him at the goal line. So um, he is a fantastic bench stash to literally give you league winning upside if something were to happen to Pollard. Now is the time where if you're in a league and let's say you were holding on to like a Jameson Williams, like saying, okay, I think, Jameson could have this huge upside at the end of the season, maybe have a breakout game. Do you really feel comfortable putting Jameson Williams into your starting lineup? If you don't feel comfortable doing that, I would opt to drop a guy like that in order to pick up a player like Rico Dowdle. Because while I'm not comfortable putting Rico Dowdle in my starting lineup, there is a scenario where Rico Dowdle can literally win my league. So those are the kind of moves that we're making. Chase Brown has also pushed himself into that category. And I'm so excited about that. I cannot believe, oh man, I was so hopeful that this would have happened earlier in the season because I just was gung-ho in terms of all kind of stupid investment into Chase Brown, just dynasty shares across the board. If there was a pick in the first round or in the fourth round that I had, you best believe I was coming out with Chase Brown. Yeah. And even in redraft, just drafting him as a late bench stash and just in best ball, taking chances. So super, super excited for Chase Brown and what he's showing. Maybe he gets the potential. Again, we're not trusting it yet, really, because if he didn't get that one big touchdown pass, it would have looked similar to the previous week where it was like, 6-7 fantasy points. And that's fine. 6, 7, 8 fantasy points from a backup running back. We're liking that. We like to see that. We're not putting it into our starting lineup, but it makes us happy. But what we love here is that we're seeing him operate in the capacity that showcases that he's the direct handcuff and he would be a 3-down back. That's the key here. So he's absolutely someone, again, like Rico Dowdle, that we need to be stashing, holding, because if he were to fall into a starting position here, anything happened to Joe Mixon, again, league winning upside because of the volume that he would have, the pass catching. So it would in goal line opportunities as well. So that's another one there. And especially from a dynasty perspective, good Lord, him, Tony, these are all guys also from a dynasty perspective that you're taking, not even taking a chance on, right? These are guys that you are holding. We'll talk about it during the off season about whether these are trade candidates. Are you dumping them and trying to get good draft picks out of them, decent draft picks out of them to make a little something happen? Are you flipping them? Are you holding and waiting and see? So these are all good off-season topics that we'll have around these guys. And then again, this isn't a handcuff here. I wanted to close this one out for running backs, but if a guy like D'Onta Foreman is on waivers in your league because for some reason, and it is beyond me, people don't want to let go of their preseason feelings that Khalil Herbert was the back to own here and was going to have the league winning upside and that zero RB target that it's gonna be fantastic for you. It's time to let go of any bias that you have towards there and accept that D'Onta Foreman is the clear lead back. We've got enough evidence here that he is the lead back, and he was I haven't looked at the updated roster percentages, but heading into the waiver wire ads, he was lower rostered than Khalil Herbert. Wild. I don't like Khalil Herbert was over 50% rostered. This is a guy who hasn't seen more than 50% of snaps since week 5. It's not happening with Khalil Herbert. And I don't even think Khalil Herbert is honestly worthy of a handcuff here. Honestly speaking, if you were to say, would you rather roster Khalil Herbert or Rico Dowdle? I would tell you 1,000 times over, I would rather roster Rico Dowdle. I know Rico Dowdle has upside if Tony Pollard were to go down. I know that. I can factually quantify that. At the same time, I've factually seen Khalil Herbert. No, there is no say, okay, I accept D'Onta Foreman is the lead back and Foreman goes down. Well, then that means that Khalil Herbert's going to be a high upside handcuff. We want to roster him. Absolutely not. Prior to the bye week, what did we see? We saw Roschon Johnson getting the massive, massive share of snaps. And Khalil Herbert barely getting any. So no. No. We want to roster D'Onta Foreman. He is the lead back there. And let me tell you, we're getting ahead here because we do not like his matchup this week. We are not going to start him in this matchup. But good Lord, we are starting him next week. Arizona, absolutely. Make sure that he is rostered in your league. Don't have any bias that he's not somebody that you want to roster because of the combination of the committee and Justin Fields and his running capabilities. No, we are rostering D'Onta Foreman, and we are potentially going to start him with confidence next week. So get prepared, get ready, look ahead. Wide receivers are a little bit more tricky, obviously, because at this point, right, wide receivers are wide receivers. If you haven't had that breakout, you're probably not going to have it. But there are some guys that we could have some late value here from. And one of those guys is oh, sorry about that. Got distracted there for 1 second here. One of those guys is Michael Wilson. Another is Jonathan Mingo. And another is Wan'Dale Robinson. Looking at this lineup of potential wide receiver options here. Sorry, I was sitting here and I got a message related to the show, and I was like, "Oh no!" It was regarding sponsor adding. It's okay though. We'll roll as is. Looking at these options here, it's tough to find wide receivers that really offer you good value late season, but Michael Wilson is one of those who we could potentially really truly turn to here. He's technically already had his breakout game, and after that we were hoping to see more, but unfortunately it just didn't work out. When we were looking at Michael Wilson, when was that breakout game of his? Do you remember when it was? It was week 4 against San Francisco. 7 targets, 76 yards, a touchdown. This is an ideal matchup for him. Maybe it's not an ideal matchup for other people, but for Michael Wilson, if he can play this week, this is very interesting. And I want to see this. Again, it was not with Kyler Murray at quarterback, but that's fine. We know that Michael Wilson, when he's healthy, is the wide receiver 2 in this offense. We know that. And looking ahead here, I like this matchup against San Francisco. I don't like the matchup against Chicago. I love the matchup against Philadelphia. If we can see him come back, do well in this matchup against San Francisco. And Chicago, I don't need to see a good matchup. I just need to see your continued target share. I can potentially flex you in week 17 against Philadelphia. I could do that in a deep league, 100%. Jonathan Mingo again is another one. I have reached peak frustration with Jonathan Mingo, and it's not frustration with him. It's frustration with Bryce Young. Obviously, the Panthers have made a clear choice to move forward with Jonathan Mingo as the wide receiver 1, theoretically, in terms of targeting over Adam Thielen. Their season is over. They're trying to push and evaluate talent for next year. They need to understand, is Jonathan Mingo capable of being that wide receiver 1? He's led the team in targets for the past 2 weeks, a total of 19 targets. That's such a healthy amount of targets. In week 13, he was 6 of 10 for 69 yards. Yay. In week 14, 2 of 9, 22 yards. Even that week 13, it was yay, but it's kind of like a yay kind of situation. I trust Mingo. I don't trust Bryce Young. That said, I am willing to hold him for the potential upside. And keep him on my fantasy bench and, acquire him if he's on waivers for the potential upside that he offers in terms of volume. He does have a week 17 matchup against Jacksonville that profiles very similarly to that week 13 game, which was against Tampa Bay, where he had a very good performance. Then Wan'Dale Robinson. It was really good to see Wan'Dale step up this week. I do think he has the most upside of any of the Giants wide receivers. And I always have felt that way. If you follow my content, waiver wire content in general as well, you know that Jalen Hyatt was kind of making it onto a lot of waiver wire lists as he had that little breakout game before the Giants bye week. And if you follow mine in my top 10 list, maybe in deep leagues, I have recommended him once, but in top 10 lists, you will notice that Jalen Hyatt is very absent from those lists for me. I just didn't buy it. Wandale is the one to own there. We've got 2 weeks where he has had a strong snap count back to back. Strong game, strong targets, good yardage. He looks fantastic. So Wandale is the one if you're trusting the epic story of Tommy DeVito. I should have made Tommy DeVito our flagship topic for the day. How did I miss that? Oh, that's right, because I'm a Packers fan and it hurt my heart for the Packers to lose. But man, that Tommy DeVito story is fantastic. I'm obsessed with it. Obsessed. Oh, the agent on the sidelines, everything is just it's so perfect. Now let's move on to tight end streaming options here. We'll pick up the pace a little. There are 2 guys here, Tucker Kraft. And Tucker Kraft is a guy that I prefer to someone like a K Dotton in terms of streaming options, because K Dotton's, production has been a little bit more volatile. Tucker Kraft has been a little bit more steady, maybe lacking the upside a little bit, but in terms of what I'm expecting out of a tight end, in terms of what I want from a tight end, I'm okay with streaming Tucker Kraft. Davis Allen is another one that you need to look out for. We talked about Matt Stafford and the hot streak that he's on. That's the key here. Matt Stafford is on a hot streak. Davis Allen, if Tyler Higbee is out, is a very streamable option, in an excellent matchup against Washington this week. I apologize to my Clemson brethren, Davis Allen. I'm sorry. The receiving profile is fine. My problem is that it's not that I didn't believe in him. I just, you're looking at a team with Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua, and Kyron Williams. What target share that I really think that Davis Allen was going to warrant in that pecking order? But surprisingly, he stepped up, and that was very impressive. A very interesting kind of look in Dynasty as well. He does have a strong receiving profile. He was, not a ton of volume at Clemson, but key situational receptions, good hands. So very intriguing. Moving on to defenses here real quick. Defenses, you need to get ahead. You'd have to get ahead because week 16 is not a good streaming week for defenses. And we got a mailbag question here. And this is literally perfect for this concept from Phobos 456. On a bye week in week 15, what defense and kicker should I pick up and stream for week 16 and 17? Any other players on waiver wires that I can pick up now and stash? Denver. I'm surprised Denver is so low rostered. I think the problem with Denver is that they have these bad matchups, and people think I don't want to start Denver against such and such team because that's a high powered offense. And so maybe that's affecting the roster percentages, but Denver has been a very fine option this week. They've produced, they've had bad matchups. And week 16, they got New England. Don't let one good Bailey Zappi performance fool you. That's a bad team. It's a bad team. I love Denver in that matchup. Potentially, I would grab them right now for sure. And then after that, they get the Chargers, which obviously good matchup against Easton Stick, more than likely. So I mean, yes, more than likely, unless I think they stick with stick. Keep things going with stick. God, that's weird. They keep things going with stick for a remainder of the season, and they're not in playoff contention unless he goes on some kind of miraculous run here. There's no reason for them to say, I got to go out and get a veteran. No, just you're through. Just wrap it up. But yeah, that's an awesome, another good matchup as well. So I would grab Denver for sure. And if you can't grab Denver, Seattle is very streamable against Tennessee. I know that what was it? Will Levis had a strong performance this past week. And that's good. That's good from him from a fantasy perspective. He still turned the ball over. That's the key right there, is he is turning the ball over every single game. Since he's taken over as a starter, outside of that first big miraculous game to start, the only team that he hasn't turned the ball over against is Carolina. And they literally have the fewest turnovers in the NFL. So literally any other time he's turning the ball over every single game. Miami looked terrible, right? Against Tennessee, defense still put up over 10 fantasy points. It's a good matchup. We can go with that. Oh, man. Moving on to some more start-sit questions here. We have got, let's see. We have got a question from GFS Reg 124229. We've got a series of questions here because we got a ton of good start sit questions, and 3 of them came from this mailbag person. So appreciate that. I have included all 3 of them in the show. First one is Achane versus Rice. This is good. This was a good question. Achane is in a good matchup against the Jets in terms of the best way attacking them being on the ground. The only problem here with Achane is that obviously, and we didn't see him against the Jets in the last matchup. We only saw Mostert, and Mostert had a fantastic game. So the good news is that we know it's a good matchup for the Miami running backs. The bad news is that we don't know how much volume Achane's going to get. Rasheed Rice against New England is a wee bit risky. I like him, but New England's defense is not the ideal matchup 9 times out of 10. I lean towards taking the upside risk, given that we're in the playoffs with Achane. The next question is Dalton Schultz or Logan Thomas. If Dalton Schultz is healthy, we are starting a healthy Dalton Schultz. And then the third question is Waddle or Metcalf. This is such a good question. Such a good question because there's multiple layers to it, right? So we're talking about, okay, Waddle against the Jets. Okay, we already saw that game again. He had 8 receptions on 8 targets. Fantastic game. He was great. Tyreek was great. Tua was trash. I'm sorry. Tua was not trash. That was mean. Tua was a below average fantasy quarterback. But this is not a bad matchup for Waddle, theoretically. Then we look at Metcalf. Potentially without Geno Smith. Or maybe Geno Smith, if he even comes back, just kind of on limited capacity, playing through an injury, not good. But this is an excellent matchup against Philadelphia. I don't really care who's at quarterback. If you could give me Drew Lock at quarterback in this matchup, I will ride with DK Metcalf against Philadelphia because I have been targeting Philadelphia's secondary all season long, and Lord help me, it has not failed. It has not failed. Oh my God. And DFS, if you want to make some money, man, just target Philadelphia's secondary. It is the most fail-safe. It is the most fail-safe strategy ever. Like, just plug in whatever you can, stack it. Like, I had some ridiculous showdown stack in the Cowboys Philadelphia game where I did Dak, and the only Philadelphia option that I had was Jalen Hurts. And I came in like 3rd in the showdown contest that I was in. You are just heavy stacking any and every team that has played against Philadelphia, with the exception of the running back. Sorry, guys. I'm perennially coughing, but it's funny. I'm sorry. It really is. Like, you never fade anybody that's facing Philadelphia. You go hard on the quarterback and the pass catchers against Philadelphia. Just go hard. It is a fail-safe plan. Win your fantasy league, make you some money in DFS. Fail-safe. Moving on to the next question from Duke Lawndale. Dynasty League question. Who should I keep in 2024? Bijan or Travis Etienne? Hashtag there's always next season. I love that. I should not have made myself laugh so much on that last question. I'm so sorry for laughing at Philadelphia's secondary. And now my karma for that is just that I'm just gonna cough during the remaining like 5 minutes of the show. Okay, I'm good. I don't have any water here. I only have coffee. That was dumb. All right. Back to the question. Who should I keep in 2024? Bijan or Travis Etienne? I will take the chance on keeping Bijan over Travis Etienne. Just ruined the end of the show laughing at Philadelphia. Thank you, Philly. I truly think that we see Bijan emerge next year. I think we're on the cusp of it. And as much as we just can't stand Arthur Smith, and I say we, but it's mainly me, I just despise Arthur Smith with every ounce of being. And I do think he'll have a job next year. I don't think that they're going to fire him. Arthur Blank loves Arthur Smith. That said, I do think that we're going to see Bijan emerge, and potentially spicy take here because Travis Etienne is RB3 overall in the season. I'm a wee bit worried that he's a massive regression candidate. The touchdowns are what aggressively carried him, and we've seen what is happening with Travis Etienne in these matchups that are bad matchups, tough matchups, and he can't get those touchdowns. It doesn't work out. It doesn't work out for him. And it's not a knock on Travis Etienne. I'm not knocking Travis Etienne or anything. He's just not that CMC or JT level, right? That can overcome difficult matchups, pure volume, and it's not going to matter. He's just not there yet. And I don't know if he can get there. So while I'm completely fine with Travis Etienne, I do think he's a potential regression candidate. And I want to lean into Bijan Robinson next year. One more question here from Revan JJ. Dear Miss Fantasy, please heal Keenan Allen. Thank you. Diggs and Allen were making me great most of the season. Second missed practice for Allen. I have Puka and can slide him in, then go 3 RBs instead of 3 wide receivers. Seriously, though, any news around Allen and his second missed practice? And this is the terrible thing about this time of year. We're not going to get news of any kind of definitive. Well, no, here's the good thing. We'll have, we're getting some definitive news here because it is a Thursday night game. That said, let's prep for Keenan Allen starting, right? So we're prepping for Keenan Allen starting. It's about the confidence level that we have in him starting when he's obviously dealing with an injury in a bad quarterback situation versus are we trusting that we can trust him? It's not a start issue, right? It's do we trust him to play at full capacity and do we trust him to make it through the game? Or do we pivot to someone else? Because we love Puka. We love Puka's matchup here. I still think that even though we've got the terrible quarterback situation, I still think that we lean into Keenan Allen. We roll with Keenan Allen. This is a start your studs kind of situation. And again, we've seen Keenan Allen multiple times this year where he's been dealing with these injuries, not practicing, limited, and he plays, and there's no physical issue with him. It's literally just a matter of the quarterback situation. So injury and playing through that is not concerning me here. It's the quarterback situation. I would still roll with Keenan Allen, and obviously you're flexing Puka, so you're moving him into the flex, obviously, and you're pushing out one of those running backs. All right. That wraps things up. Those were good mailbag questions. This was a good show. And I'm looking forward to more of our off-season content. We're going to be getting a lot of those dynasty questions. We're going to be getting trade questions here, keeper questions. We're going to be getting good stuff here. So I'm excited for what is to come in the off-season. Make sure, again, that you are following Player Profiler on YouTube. Nice and subscribe so that you can get all of those fantastic shows, because it's not just me. I'm one little piece. There's so much good content out there. And obviously there's still start sit shows, dynasty shows. I've just watched the FFPC show that was done yesterday. Was it yesterday? Yeah, yesterday. Watch that. So there's just good content across the board for every single thing that you need. So make sure that you're tuned in. But that wraps things up for our show. Again, if you have any questions, you can always tag me on Twitter at It's Tara Time, ITSTERATIME, and I will respond. And if you're listening to the podcast version, make sure that you are subscribed. That would be amazing. And if you are watching this on YouTube, make sure that you like the video and drop me a comment. Make sure you're subscribed to Player Profiler as well again. And that wraps things up. Good luck with your fantasy lineups. I hope you win, and I will catch you again